What happens when the future of an entire kingdom rests on a single, devastating secret? Prince Alexander of Eldoria thought he knew his family, his legacy, and his destiny. But when a mysterious letter arrives at his new residence, Thornfield Manor, everything he believed about his stepmother, Queen Consort Victoria, begins to unravel. For 15 years, Victoria has stood beside his father, King Edmund, as the perfect royal wife. She's been the face of charity, the voice of diplomacy, and the steady hand that guided the kingdom through its darkest hours. But beneath her polished exterior lies a web of deception so intricate, so damaging, that its exposure could topple the very foundations of the monarchy itself. This is the story of how one prince discovered that the woman he called mother had been playing a game far more dangerous than anyone imagined. A game where the stakes weren't just personal, they were the future of an entire nation. And when the truth finally comes to light, Prince Alexander must make the most difficult decision of his life: protect his family's reputation or protect his kingdom from the woman who has been slowly destroying it from within. Welcome to a tale of betrayal, courage, and the price of power. This is the story of how a future king learned that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty requires the ultimate act of betrayal. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Thornfield Manor like secrets refusing to be revealed. Prince Alexander of Eldoria stood at the towering windows of what would become his new study, watching as the sun struggled to penetrate the gray veil that shrouded his ancestral home. At 32, he possessed the commanding presence expected of a future king, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of steady gaze that inspired confidence in times of crisis. But today, something felt different. Today, the weight of his destiny seemed heavier than the crown jewels themselves. Thornfield Manor had been in the royal family for over 3 centuries, serving as a retreat from the pressures of court life. The sprawling estate, with its Gothic towers and manicured gardens, had witnessed the rise and fall of kings, the birth of princes, and the quiet moments that shaped a nation's history. Alexander had spent countless summers here as a child, racing through the corridors with his younger sister, Princess Isabella, while their mother, the late Queen Catherine, watched with gentle amusement from the garden terrace. Those days felt like another lifetime now. Queen Catherine had passed away when Alexander was 17, leaving behind a void that seemed to echo through the very halls of the palace. King Edmund, devastated by the loss of his beloved wife, had retreated into his grief for nearly 2 years before Queen Consort Victoria entered their lives like a beacon of hope in their darkest hour. Victoria Ashworth had been everything the kingdom needed: intelligent, compassionate, and possessing an uncanny ability to connect with people from all walks of life. She was the daughter of a respected diplomat, well-educated, and perfectly suited for royal life. Her marriage to King Edmund 3 years after Queen Catherine's death had been met with widespread approval from both the nobility and the common people. She brought stability to a grieving king and became the mother figure that Alexander and Isabella desperately needed, or so everyone believed. As Alexander unpacked his personal belongings in the master bedroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The servants had been unusually quiet during his arrival yesterday, their eyes avoiding his gaze as they went about their duties. Mrs. Hartwell, the head housekeeper who had served the family for over 40 years, seemed particularly troubled. She had welcomed him with her usual warmth, but there was an undercurrent of tension in her manner that Alexander couldn't ignore. The decision to move to Thornfield Manor hadn't been entirely his own. Queen Consort Victoria had suggested it during a family dinner 3 weeks ago, arguing that Alexander needed a space of his own to prepare for his future role as king. "You need distance from the palace politics," she had said, her voice carrying that tone of maternal concern that had always comforted him. "Thornfield will give you the peace and perspective you need." King Edmund had readily agreed, and even Isabella had supported the idea, though Alexander noticed a strange look pass between his sister and Victoria during the conversation, a brief moment of silent communication that he couldn't decipher. At the time, he had attributed it to the natural complexity of family dynamics. Now, surrounded by the quiet grandeur of Thornfield, he wondered if there had been more to that exchange than he realized. The manor itself was a masterpiece of medieval architecture, with modern amenities discreetly integrated to maintain its historical authenticity. The main hall featured soaring ceilings supported by massive oak beams, while tapestries depicting the kingdom's glorious history adorned the stone walls. The library, which Alexander intended to use as his primary workspace, contained over 10,000 volumes, including rare manuscripts and first editions that chronicled centuries of royal decisions and their consequences. As he explored the manor room by room, Alexander began to understand why his ancestors had chosen this place as their sanctuary. There was something profoundly peaceful about the isolation, the way the thick walls seemed to muffle the outside world and create a bubble of tranquility. Yet beneath that peace, he sensed something else, a watchfulness, as if the very stones were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The first sign that his instincts were correct came that afternoon, when Mrs. Hartwell approached him in the library. She knocked softly on the heavy wooden door and entered with a tea service, her movements betraying a nervousness that was completely out of character. "Your Royal Highness," she began, setting the tray down on the massive oak desk that dominated the room. "I hope you're finding everything to your satisfaction." "Everything is perfect, Mrs. Hartwell," Alexander replied, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she arranged the cups and saucers. "You and your staff have outdone yourselves, as always." The elderly housekeeper paused, her weathered hands hovering over the tea service. For a moment, it seemed as though she wanted to say something more, but then she simply nodded and turned to leave. "Mrs. Hartwell," Alexander called out, causing her to stop at the threshold. "Is there something troubling you? You seem concerned about something." The housekeeper turned slowly, her pale blue eyes meeting his with an expression of profound conflict. "Your Royal Highness, there are things, old servants notice things, you understand. But it's not my place to speak of such matters." "You've been with this family longer than anyone," Alexander said gently, rising from his chair and approaching her. "If there's something I should know, I trust your judgment completely." Mrs. Hartwell's internal struggle was evident in every line of her face. She glanced toward the door, as if checking to ensure they were truly alone, then lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. "There was a visitor here last week, Your Royal Highness, before your arrival was announced. A gentleman from the capital, well-dressed, official-looking. He spent considerable time in the East Wing, particularly in the room that was once your dear mother's private study." Alexander felt a chill that had nothing to do with the manor's stone walls. "A visitor? Was he sent by the royal household?" "That's just it, sir. He bore no official credentials that we could verify. When questioned by our security, he claimed to be conducting a routine inspection on behalf of the Crown Estate. But," she paused, her voice growing even quieter, "I've been managing this household for 40 years, Your Royal Highness. I know every inspector, every official who has legitimate business here. This man was a stranger. Did he take anything? Remove any documents or belongings?" "Not that we could determine, but he was very interested in your mother's personal papers. The room has been sealed since her passing, as per your father's instructions, but the locks showed signs of tampering." The implications hit Alexander like a physical blow. His mother's study had been left untouched since her death 15 years ago, preserved as a shrine to her memory and a repository of her personal correspondence, journals, and private thoughts. If someone had gained unauthorized access to those intimate records, it represented a violation not just of property, but of his family's most sacred memories. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need you to show me that room immediately." The East Wing of Thornfield Manor had always been the most private section of the estate, reserved for the family's personal use. As they walked through the carpeted corridors, past portraits of long-dead royals and windows that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding countryside, Alexander felt a growing sense of unease. The silence here was different, heavier, more oppressive than the comfortable quiet of the rest of the manor. Queen Catherine's study was located at the end of the corridor, behind an ornate door bearing the royal coat of arms. Mrs. Hartwell produced an ornate brass key from the ring at her waist, but as she inserted it into the lock, Alexander could see what she meant about signs of tampering. Tiny scratches around the keyhole, barely visible to the naked eye, suggested that someone with considerable skill had gained entry without the proper key. The door swung open to reveal a room frozen in time. Queen Catherine's personal sanctuary remained exactly as she had left it on the day of her death. The mahogany desk positioned to catch the afternoon light, the bookshelves lined with her favorite novels and poetry collections, the comfortable reading chair where she would spend hours writing in her journals. Even the crystal paperweight that Alexander had given her for her birthday still sat in its place of honor on the desk. But something was wrong. Alexander's memories of this room were vivid and detailed, shaped by countless afternoons spent here with his mother as she attended to her correspondence, or simply read while he played quietly nearby. He knew every detail of this space, every book, every ornament, every piece of furniture. And, while everything appeared to be in its proper place, there was something subtly different about the arrangement. Mrs. Hartwell, the desk drawers. Were they all closed when the mysterious visitor left? The housekeeper moved closer, studying the antique desk with the eye of someone who had maintained this room with religious devotion. The top drawer on the right, Your Royal Highness. It was slightly ajar when we discovered his presence. I closed it immediately, of course, but Alexander moved to the desk and carefully opened the drawer in question. Inside, he found the usual collection of his mother's personal items: fountain pens, stationery bearing the royal monogram, reading glasses, and a small leather-bound address book. But underneath these items, in a space where his mother had kept her most private correspondence, there was nothing but empty space. "There should be letters here," he said, his voice tight with growing alarm. Mother kept all of her personal correspondence in this drawer, letters from friends, family members, even some from political figures. The collection spanned decades. Mrs. Hartwell's face had gone pale. "I remember those letters, Your Royal Highness. Your mother treasured them greatly. She would sometimes reread them when she was feeling particularly nostalgic." The theft of his mother's private correspondence was disturbing enough, but Alexander's trained mind as a future ruler immediately grasped the broader implications. Those letters could contain sensitive information about royal family dynamics, political relationships, or personal opinions that could be damaging if made public. In the wrong hands, they could be used for blackmail, political manipulation, or simple character assassination. But who would want such materials, and why now? Queen Catherine had been gone for 15 years. What possible relevance could her old letters have to current events? As if reading his thoughts, Mrs. Hartwell spoke quietly. "There's something else, Your Royal Highness. Something that's been troubling me for quite some time." Alexander turned to face her, noting the deep concern etched in her weathered features. "What is it?" "It's about the Queen Consort, sir. Please understand, I mean no disrespect to Her Majesty, but there have been inconsistencies." "What kind of inconsistencies?" Mrs. Hartwell moved to the window, gazing out at the gardens where Queen Catherine had once spent so many peaceful hours. "Your mother kept meticulous records, Your Royal Highness. Every letter she received, every important conversation, every decision that might affect the family. She documented it all in her private journals. Those journals are kept in the palace archives, sealed by your father's order. But, before her death, she entrusted me with certain copies of important entries." She turned back to Alexander, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Your mother had concerns about certain individuals at court, people she believed might pose a threat to the royal family's stability. She was particularly worried about ambitious courtiers who might seek to gain influence through marriage or manipulation." Alexander felt his world beginning to shift on its axis. "Are you suggesting that my mother suspected someone specifically?" "I'm saying that your mother was a very perceptive woman, Your Royal Highness. She understood the game of politics better than anyone gave her credit for. And, in her final months, she became increasingly concerned about the future security of the monarchy." The housekeeper moved to a small bookshelf in the corner of the room and, after a moment's hesitation, reached behind a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets to retrieve a slim manila envelope. "Your mother asked me to keep this safe, with instructions that it should only be opened if circumstances arose that threatened the family's welfare. I've carried this burden for 15 years, hoping that day would never come." Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the envelope. His mother's elegant handwriting adorned the front. For Alexander, when he is ready to protect what matters most. Inside the envelope, he found 3 items: a letter in his mother's handwriting, a photograph, and what appeared to be a copy of an official document. The letter was brief, but devastating in its implications. "My beloved son," it began, "if you are reading this, then the concerns I have harbored in my final days have proven to be justified. I pray that I am wrong about what I suspect, but a mother's intuition rarely fails when it comes to protecting her children. The woman who may one day seek to replace me in your father's affections is not who she appears to be. I have discovered evidence that suggests Victoria Ashworth has been systematically positioning herself for access to our family long before your father's grief made him vulnerable to her influence." Alexander's blood ran cold as he continued reading. The letter detailed his mother's growing suspicions about Victoria's background, her mysterious financial resources, and her connections to certain political figures who had opposed the monarchy's policies. But It was the final paragraph that truly shook him to his core. The photograph and document enclosed will provide you with the evidence you need to protect your father and your kingdom. Victoria's true identity and her real agenda pose a threat not just to our family's happiness, but to the very stability of the realm. Trust no one at court until you can verify their loyalties. The future of the crown may depend on your ability to act on this information when the time is right. The photograph showed a much younger Victoria Ashworth in what appeared to be an intimate conversation with Marcus Blackwood, a notorious political operative who had been exiled from the kingdom 8 years ago for attempting to sell state secrets to foreign powers. The timestamp on the photo predated Victoria's supposed first meeting with King Edmund by nearly 5 years. The document was even more damning. A financial record showing substantial payments made to Victoria Ashworth from an account linked to the Resistance Coalition, a separatist group that sought to overthrow the monarchy and establish a republican government. Alexander sank into his mother's chair, the weight of the revelations crushing down upon him. For 15 years, he had welcomed Victoria into his family, trusted her with his deepest secrets, and even come to love her as the mother he thought he had lost. The realization that she might have been playing an elaborate long game, positioning herself to destroy everything his family had built over centuries, left him feeling physically sick. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion, "how long have you known about this?" "I've suspected for years, Your Royal Highness, but I had no proof beyond your mother's words and my own observations. The Queen Consort has been very careful, very patient. But lately," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "Lately what?" "Lately, there have been small signs that her true nature is beginning to show. Questions about family finances that seem inappropriate, private meetings with individuals whose loyalty to the crown is questionable, and a particular interest in legal matters concerning succession and inheritance laws." The implications were staggering. If Victoria had indeed infiltrated the royal family as part of a long-term plot to destabilize the monarchy, then her influence over King Edmund could be used to manipulate policy decisions, access state secrets, or even alter the line of succession. The fact that she had suggested Alexander's relocation to Thornfield Manor took on a much more sinister meaning in this context. Alexander stood up abruptly, his mind racing through the possible scenarios. "We need to verify this information independently. If my mother's suspicions were correct, then Victoria may be planning something significant, possibly timed to coincide with my absence from the palace. Your Royal Highness, there's one more thing you should know. Yesterday, after your departure from the palace, Princess Isabella attempted to contact you by telephone. When she was told you were unavailable, she asked to speak with me directly. She seemed frightened." Alexander felt his protective instincts flare. Isabella was 28 now, intelligent and capable, but she had always been particularly close to their mother and had struggled more than anyone with accepting Victoria as their stepmother. If Isabella was frightened, there was undoubtedly good reason. What did she say? She couldn't speak freely, Your Royal Highness. But she managed to convey that there had been some kind of confrontation with the Queen Consort, something about documents that Isabella had discovered in the palace archives. She mentioned that she would try to contact you again when it was safe to do so. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a terrifying picture. If Victoria had somehow learned of Queen Catherine's hidden evidence, then both Alexander and Isabella could be in considerable danger. The theft of his mother's correspondence from Thornfield Manor suggested that Victoria's associates were actively working to eliminate any threats to their plans. Alexander moved to the window, staring out at the peaceful countryside that had been his family's refuge for generations. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had come here seeking peace and perspective, only to discover that his family was potentially facing the greatest threat in its history. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need you to contact our most trusted security personnel immediately. No one from the palace staff, people you've known personally for years, people whose loyalty to this family is beyond question. We need to secure this manor and establish secure communications with Isabella. Of course, Your Royal Highness. But what about the king? Surely your father needs to be warned." Alexander considered this carefully. King Edmund's love for Victoria had been genuine and profound, helping him emerge from the devastating grief of losing Queen Catherine. The revelation that his wife might be a carefully planted enemy agent would destroy him emotionally and potentially destabilize his ability to rule effectively. "We need proof first," Alexander decided. "Solid, undeniable evidence that even my father's love for Victoria cannot dismiss." Until we have that, we proceed carefully and tell no one at the palace what we've discovered. As the afternoon shadows grew longer, Alexander found himself grappling with the most challenging situation of his life. The woman he had called mother for 15 years, the person who had comforted him through adolescence and guided him toward adulthood, might be the very enemy his real mother had died trying to expose. The weight of the crown he would one day wear had never felt heavier. But, as he looked once more at his mother's letter, at her final act of love and protection, Alexander felt his resolve hardening. Whatever Victoria Ashworth's true plans might be, whatever damage she intended to inflict upon his family and kingdom, he would be ready for her. The game had begun 15 years ago with a grieving king and a perfectly positioned woman offering comfort in his darkest hour. But now the stakes had changed, and Prince Alexander of Eldoria was no longer the trusting teenager who had welcomed a new mother into his life. Now he was a future king who had just discovered that his greatest enemy had been living under his own roof all along. And, as the sun set over Thornfield Manor, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, Alexander began planning the most important battle of his life, a battle to save his family, his kingdom, and everything he held dear from the woman who had spent 15 years positioning herself to destroy it all. The secure telephone line crackled with static as Alexander waited in the hidden communications room beneath Thornfield Manor. Built during World War II as a bunker for the royal family, the underground chamber had been updated with modern encryption technology that would make their conversation nearly impossible to intercept. At 3 in the morning, the manor above was silent, giving him the privacy he desperately needed for this call. Alexander. Isabella's voice came through clearly, but he could hear the strain beneath her carefully controlled tone. Thank God you called. I wasn't sure the palace lines were secure anymore. Are you safe right now? Alexander asked immediately, his protective instincts overriding everything else. I'm in Mother's Memorial Garden, Isabella replied, referring to the private section of the palace grounds dedicated to Queen Catherine's memory. It's the only place I can be certain we won't be overheard. Victoria never comes here. She says it makes her uncomfortable. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on Alexander. Of course, Victoria would avoid the one place that might remind her of the woman whose life she had potentially been planning to destroy from the very beginning. Isabella, Mrs. Hartwell told me you tried to call yesterday. She said you seemed frightened. What happened? There was a long pause before Isabella answered, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I found something, Alexander. Something that proves what I've suspected about Victoria for years. But I think she knows that I know. Alexander's grip tightened on the encrypted phone. Tell me everything. 2 days ago, I was in the palace archives researching some historical documents for my upcoming charity presentation. You know how I like to include personal family stories to make the work more meaningful. I was looking for some of Mother's old correspondence about her humanitarian projects when I discovered something that shouldn't have been there. Alexander waited, knowing his sister well enough to understand that she was carefully choosing her words. Hidden behind a loose panel in one of the archive cabinets, I found a collection of documents that definitely didn't belong in Mother's files. Financial records, communication logs, even what appeared to be surveillance reports. All dated from before Mother's death, and all related to Victoria. The implications sent a chill down Alexander's spine. What kind of surveillance reports? Details about our family's daily routines, our security protocols, our personal relationships, even our psychological profiles. Someone had been studying us for months before Mother died, learning our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities. The reports were incredibly detailed. They knew about Father's sleeping patterns, his favorite foods, his emotional triggers. They knew about your relationship with Sarah Worthington, even though you thought you were keeping that secret at the time. Alexander remembered Sarah well, his first serious relationship, which he had ended abruptly when the pressures of royal duty became too overwhelming. He had indeed thought their connection was private, known only to his closest friends. The idea that someone had been watching and documenting even his most personal moments filled him with a cold rage. Isabella, please tell me you copied those documents before returning them to their hiding place. I photographed everything with my phone. But, Alexander, that's not the worst part. When I was leaving the archives yesterday, I encountered Victoria in the corridor. She seemed surprised to see me there, asked what I was researching. I tried to give her a casual answer about charity work, but she kept pressing for details. Then, she made a comment that made my blood run cold. What did she say? She said that Mother had always been too trusting, that she never understood how dangerous it could be to keep detailed records of family business. She said it almost like a threat, as if she was warning me not to follow in Mother's footsteps. Alexander felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with terrifying clarity. She knows you found something. The question is, how much does she know about what you discovered? I think she suspects I found the documents, but I don't think she's certain yet. However, there's been increased security around the archives since yesterday. When I tried to return this morning to photograph additional materials I might have missed, I was told that section was temporarily closed for maintenance. The guards were people I didn't recognize, not our usual palace security. This was even worse than Alexander had feared. If Victoria was moving to control access to potentially damaging information, it suggested that whatever her ultimate plan might be, she was preparing to accelerate its timeline. Isabella, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I've discovered some disturbing information here at Thornfield Manor that confirms your worst suspicions about Victoria. Mother left hidden evidence that suggests Victoria has been playing an extremely long game, possibly connected to political forces that want to destroy the monarchy. He could hear his sister's sharp intake of breath. I knew it. I've felt it for years, but everyone kept telling me I was being paranoid or jealous. Even Father dismissed my concerns as residual grief over Mother's death. You were right to trust your instincts. But, Isabella, if Victoria realizes that we're onto her, both of our lives could be in danger. We need to be incredibly careful about our next moves. What do you want me to do? Alexander had been considering their options throughout the sleepless night. First, I need you to send me those photographs you took of the archive documents. Use the secure email system that Mother set up for family communications, the one with the encryption codes that only we know. Second, I need you to start varying your daily routine immediately. Don't go to the same places at the same times, and always make sure someone trustworthy knows where you are. Alexander, what about Father? He needs to know about this. Not yet. We need irrefutable proof before we can approach him. His love for Victoria is genuine, and without overwhelming evidence, he'll simply think we're trying to sabotage his marriage out of loyalty to Mother's memory. If we're wrong about this, and I pray that we are, accusing Victoria without solid proof could destroy our relationship with Father permanently. Isabella was quiet for a moment before responding. And if we're right about this, waiting too long could destroy the kingdom. The weight of that statement settled heavily between them. As the future king and one of the kingdom's most prominent princesses, they both understood that their personal family drama had implications far beyond their private lives. The stability of the monarchy itself could depend on their ability to handle this situation correctly. I've been thinking about that all night, Alexander admitted. We need help, but we need to be extremely selective about who we trust. Do you remember Colonel Richards, Mother's former security chief? Of course. He retired to his country estate after Mother's death, said he couldn't bear to watch Father replace her memory so quickly. Why? Because he was completely loyal to Mother, and because he has the expertise to help us investigate Victoria's background independently. If anyone would know how to verify the information Mother left behind, it would be him. Do you think he'd be willing to help us? Alexander had known Colonel Richards since childhood, had watched the man's genuine grief when Queen Catherine passed away, and had seen his disapproval, carefully concealed but unmistakable, when King Edmund announced his engagement to Victoria. I think he's been waiting 15 years for someone to ask the right questions about Victoria. I'm going to contact him tomorrow and arrange a meeting. What about the stolen letters from Thornfield Manor? Have you learned anything more about who might have taken them? Alexander had spent considerable time that evening with Mrs. Hartwell and the small security team she had contacted, reviewing the manor's security footage and interviewing staff members. The results had been both illuminating and deeply troubling. The intruder was a professional, Isabella, someone with extensive knowledge of security systems and investigative techniques. But he made one crucial mistake. He was captured on a hidden camera that Mother had installed in her study years ago, a camera that even I didn't know existed. What did you see? A man in his 40s, well-dressed, carrying what appeared to be specialized equipment for opening locks and photographing documents. But, more importantly, when he was leaving the manor, he made a phone call from the gardens. Our audio enhancement equipment was able to pick up parts of the conversation. Alexander paused, still shaken by what they had discovered. He reported directly to someone he addressed as Your Majesty. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a full minute before Isabella spoke again, her voice filled with horrified realization. Victoria sent him. She's using royal resources, and authority to eliminate evidence that could expose her. It appears that way, which means she has access to people and resources that go far beyond what we initially suspected. This isn't just about an ambitious woman who married into the royal family for personal gain. This is about someone with significant backing and a sophisticated plan to undermine the monarchy from within. Isabella's voice became urgent. Alexander, if she has that level of support and organization, then we're not just dealing with Victoria. We're dealing with a conspiracy that could involve multiple people at court, possibly even some of Father's closest advisors. This was the conclusion that had kept Alexander awake throughout the night, pacing the corridors of Thornfield Manor as he tried to process the full scope of what they were facing. The idea that their father's government might be infiltrated by people working to destroy everything the royal family represented was almost too overwhelming to contemplate. We need to assume that some of our regular communications are being monitored, Alexander said. From now on, we only communicate through secure channels, and we limit our conversations to essential information only. If Victoria suspects we're investigating her, she might accelerate whatever timeline she's working under. What kind of timeline do you think we're dealing with? Alexander had been considering this question extensively. Think about recent events, Isabella. My sudden relocation to Thornfield Manor, effectively removing me from day-to-day palace operations. Your discovery in the archives, which might not have been accidental. The theft of Mother's letters, suggesting they're trying to eliminate all evidence of their original plans. It feels like they're preparing for something significant. The annual State of the Kingdom address is next month, Isabella said suddenly. Father always uses that occasion to make major announcements about policy changes or royal succession plans. The pieces clicked into place with frightening clarity. The State of the Kingdom address was broadcast throughout the realm and to international audiences, making it the perfect venue for any dramatic revelations or policy changes that Victoria might want to influence. If she had been building towards some kind of public manipulation of King Edmund, that would be the ideal opportunity. Isabella, I need you to find out everything you can about the preparations for Father's address. Who's been involved in writing it? What topics are being covered? Whether there have been any unusual meetings or discussions about its content. I can do that. But, Alexander, what if they're planning something even more drastic? What if Victoria isn't just trying to influence policy or succession plans? What if she's planning something that would eliminate the monarchy entirely? The possibility sent a chill through Alexander that had nothing to do with the underground chamber's cool air. A skilled operative with 15 years of access to royal family routines, security protocols, and personal information could potentially orchestrate something catastrophic. The fact that Marcus Blackwood, the political operative from the photograph, had connections to the separatist resistance coalition suggested that Victoria's ultimate goal might indeed be the complete overthrow of the monarchy. We have to assume the worst-case scenario and plan accordingly, Alexander decided. Which means we need to move quickly to gather enough evidence to convince Father, while simultaneously protecting ourselves and the integrity of the crown. How long do you think we have? I don't know. But, Isabella, promise me something. If you feel like you're in immediate danger, if Victoria or anyone else makes you feel threatened, you get out of the palace immediately. Come to Thornfield Manor, go to Colonel Richard's estate, or find somewhere else that's secure. Don't worry about evidence or investigations or anything else. Just get to safety. Alexander, I'm not going to abandon you or Father to face this alone. And I'm not going to lose another family member to Victoria's schemes. Alexander's voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. We're going to stop her, Isabella. We're going to protect Father and the kingdom, and we're going to honor Mother's memory by finishing the work she started. But we're going to do it smart, and we're going to do it safely. What's our next step? Alexander had been developing a plan throughout their conversation, weighing risks and resources as they talked. Tomorrow, I'm going to contact Colonel Richards and arrange a meeting. While I'm doing that, I need you to quietly gather information about Father's upcoming address and try to identify anyone at court who might be working with Victoria. Be subtle. We can't afford to alert anyone to our suspicions yet. And then, we're going to build an irrefutable case against Victoria Ashworth, or whoever she really is. We're going to expose her plans, protect our father, and make sure that Mother's sacrifice wasn't in vain. As Alexander ended the call and made his way back through the silent corridors of Thornfield Manor, he felt the full weight of his future crown settling upon his shoulders. This was no longer just about personal family drama or even individual survival. This was about the preservation of everything his family had built over centuries of rule. The morning sun was beginning to creep through the manor's windows as Alexander returned to his study, where his mother's letter still lay on the desk beside the damning photograph and financial documents. He had always known that being king would require difficult decisions and personal sacrifices. He had never imagined that it would require him to destroy the woman who had raised him in order to save the kingdom she had taught him to love. But, as he looked once more at his mother's elegant handwriting, at her final warning about the dangers facing their family, Alexander felt his resolve crystallizing into something unbreakable. Queen Catherine had died trying to protect her family and her kingdom from a threat she couldn't fully identify or prove. Her son would not make the same mistake. The game that had begun 15 years ago with a grieving king and a perfectly positioned woman was about to enter its final phase. But, this time, Victoria Ashworth would not be playing against a heartbroken widower or trusting children. This time, she would be playing against a future king who finally understood the true stakes of the game. And Alexander was determined that when this deadly chess match finally ended, only one of them would remain standing. The future of the kingdom depended on it. The fog was so thick that morning that Colonel James Richards almost missed the turn onto the private road leading to Thornfield Manor. At 68, the former head of royal security still possessed the sharp instincts and physical presence that had made him legendary among protection specialists. His steel-gray hair and weathered face spoke of decades spent safeguarding the royal family, but his penetrating blue eyes remained as alert as ever. As his vintage Jaguar navigated the winding drive toward the manor, Richards felt a familiar heaviness in his chest, the same weight that had settled there 15 years ago when he watched King Edmund announce his engagement to Victoria Ashworth. He had known, with the intuition that comes from 30 years of protecting people from threats both obvious and hidden, that something was fundamentally wrong about that woman. But grief and love had made the king deaf to subtle warnings, and Richards had been forced to watch helplessly as his worst fears slowly materialized. Alexander was waiting for him in the manor's main hall, and Richards was struck immediately by the transformation in the young prince. Gone was any trace of the uncertain young man who had struggled with his royal duties. In his place stood someone who radiated the quiet authority of a born leader, someone who had finally understood that the crown he would inherit came with responsibilities that transcended personal comfort or family loyalty. "Colonel Richards," Alexander said, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "Thank you for coming. I know the circumstances of my invitation were somewhat mysterious." "Your Royal Highness," Richards replied, studying the prince's face carefully. "When you mentioned that you needed to discuss matters concerning your mother's legacy, I would have come regardless of the circumstances. Queen Catherine was a remarkable woman who deserved better than what fate gave her." They settled in the library, where Mrs. Hartwell served tea before discreetly withdrawing and ensuring their privacy. Alexander had spent considerable time deciding how much to reveal to Richards immediately, ultimately concluding that the situation was too dangerous for anything less than complete honesty. "Colonel, what I'm about to show you may change your entire understanding of the last 15 years of our family's history. More importantly, it may reveal a threat to the monarchy that's been developing since before my mother's death." Richards set down his teacup with steady hands, but Alexander could see the alertness sharpening in his eyes. "I'm listening, Your Royal Highness." Alexander presented the evidence methodically: his mother's hidden letter, the photograph of Victoria with Marcus Blackwood, the financial records linking her to the Resistance Coalition, and Isabella's discoveries in the palace archives. With each piece of evidence, he watched Richard's expression grow darker, though the old soldier's face remained carefully controlled. When Alexander finished his presentation, Richards was silent for several long minutes, his trained mind processing the implications of what he had just learned. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with a mixture of vindication and regret. "Your mother tried to warn me, you know. In the weeks before her death, she became increasingly concerned about what she called wolves in sheep's clothing around the court. She said she had evidence of something that could threaten the kingdom's stability, but she died before she could share the details." Alexander felt his heart constrict. "You think she was murdered?" "I've wondered about that for 15 years, Richards admitted. "The official cause of death was a heart attack brought on by a rare allergic reaction to medication. But your mother was in excellent health, with no history of heart problems or serious allergies. The medication that supposedly triggered the reaction was something she had taken safely for years." The implications hit Alexander like a physical blow. His mother's death, which he had always viewed as a tragic medical accident, might have been carefully orchestrated murder designed to clear the way for Victoria's entry into their lives. Could you prove it? Not after all this time. The medical records from that period were archived under special security protocols, accessible only by direct order from the king. I requested access several times during Victoria's engagement and the early years of her marriage, but King Edmund refused, saying that revisiting the details of your mother's death was too painful. Alexander's mind raced through the possibilities. If Victoria had been planning her infiltration of the royal family for years, eliminating Queen Catherine would have been a logical first step. A widowed king in deep grief would be far more vulnerable to manipulation than a happily married monarch with a strong, intelligent wife as his advisor. Colonel, I need your professional assessment of our current situation. Based on this evidence and your experience with security threats, what do you think Victoria is ultimately planning? Richard stood and moved to the window, his gaze sweeping across the manor grounds with the automatic vigilance of someone who had spent decades watching for threats. The evidence suggests a sophisticated, long-term operation designed to destabilize the monarchy from within. The question is whether Victoria's goal is to control the crown or destroy it entirely. What's the difference? If she wants to control it, then her ultimate plan might be to manipulate your father into making policy decisions that serve her backers' interests, possibly including changes to succession laws that would benefit her position. If she wants to destroy it, then she's planning something that would discredit the royal family so thoroughly that public support for the monarchy would collapse entirely. Alexander considered both scenarios, and neither offered much comfort. How would we determine which it is? By examining the timeline and her recent actions, Richards replied. Your relocation to Thornfield Manor, the theft of your mother's correspondence, Isabella's discovery being followed immediately by restricted access to the archives. These all suggest accelerating activity. Whatever Victoria's ultimate plan might be, she appears to be moving toward its implementation. The State of the Kingdom address is next month. Richards turned from the window, his expression grim. A perfect opportunity for either scenario. If she wants to control the monarchy, she could use the address to announce policy changes that serve her agenda. If she wants to destroy it, she could orchestrate some kind of scandal or revelation that would devastate public confidence in the royal family. Alexander felt a chill of recognition. She's been working with father on the content of his address. Isabella told me that Victoria has been unusually involved in the drafting process, claiming that she wants to help him present a fresh vision for the kingdom's future. Then, we may have our timeline, Richard said grimly. If I'm right about Victoria's intentions, the State of the Kingdom address represents her best opportunity to achieve maximum impact with whatever she's planning. The weight of realization settled heavily on Alexander's shoulders. They potentially had less than a month to uncover Victoria's complete plan, gather irrefutable evidence of her treachery, and find a way to stop her without destroying King Edmund in the process. What do you recommend as our next step? Richards returned to his chair, his manner becoming businesslike and focused. We need to conduct a comprehensive investigation of Victoria's background, her current activities, and her associates. But we need to do it completely outside official channels, using resources that can't be traced back to the royal household. Can you arrange that? I still have contacts throughout the intelligence community, people who owe their careers to the work we did protecting your family over the years. More importantly, I have access to private investigation resources that operate independently of government oversight. Alexander felt a surge of hope. How long would such an investigation take? If we focus on the most critical aspects, verifying her real identity, confirming her financial backing, and identifying her current associates, we could have preliminary results within a week. A complete investigation would take longer, but we might not have that luxury. What would you need from us? Everything you can gather about Victoria's recent activities, her communications, her meetings, and her access to sensitive information. I'll also need detailed information about the preparations for your father's address, including who else has been involved in its development. Alexander nodded, already formulating plans for gathering the required intelligence. Colonel, there's something else we need to discuss. If our suspicions are correct, Victoria might realize that we're investigating her. How much danger are Isabella and I actually in? Richard's expression became even more serious. If Victoria was willing to eliminate your mother to advance her plans, she won't hesitate to eliminate anyone else who poses a threat to their success. You and Princess Isabella represent the greatest potential obstacles to whatever she's planning, which makes you both primary targets. What kind of protection do you recommend? Immediate relocation for Princess Isabella to a secure location outside the palace. For you, continued residence here at Thornfield Manor with enhanced security measures. Most importantly, no one at the palace, absolutely no one, can know about our investigation until we're ready to act on our findings. Alexander considered the implications of Isabella's relocation. She won't want to leave father unprotected. Your father is safest as long as Victoria believes her plans are proceeding smoothly. It's when she realizes that her cover has been blown that he'll be in the greatest danger. Until then, her best strategy is to maintain the illusion of being the perfect royal wife. The logic was sound, but Alexander knew convincing Isabella to leave the palace would be nearly impossible. She was as protective of their father as he was, and her sense of duty would make her reluctant to abandon her post at such a critical time. There may be another option, Richards continued. Princess Isabella has been invited to represent the royal family at the Commonwealth Education Summit in Edinburgh next week. If she were to extend her stay there for additional diplomatic meetings, it would remove her from the immediate danger zone without raising suspicions about her absence. Can you arrange additional security for her there? Absolutely. I have contacts within the Scottish security services who can provide discreet protection without official channels. As they continued planning, Alexander felt some of the overwhelming weight of the situation beginning to lift. Having Colonel Richards as an ally transformed their desperate situation into something manageable, a problem that could be solved with careful planning and professional execution. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Richards said as their meeting began to wind down. If our investigation confirms your worst fears about Victoria, we'll need to have a plan for presenting the evidence to your father in a way that he can accept. This was the aspect of their situation that Alexander dreaded most. King Edmund's love for Victoria was genuine and deep, born from the comfort she had provided during his darkest period of grief. Destroying that relationship, even to save the kingdom, would devastate his father in ways that might never heal. Do you have any suggestions for handling that conversation? We'll need overwhelming evidence that leaves no room for doubt or alternative interpretations. We'll also need to present him with a clear plan for how to handle the situation publicly, so that his personal devastation doesn't translate into a national crisis. Alexander understood the deeper implications. If Victoria's treachery became public knowledge, it would represent one of the greatest scandals in the kingdom's history. The monarchy's reputation for good judgment and family stability would be severely damaged, potentially providing ammunition for Republican movements that sought to abolish the crown entirely. The irony is that Victoria's greatest success might be her final victory, Alexander observed. Even if we stop her plans and expose her treachery, the mere fact that she successfully infiltrated and manipulated the royal family for 15 years could be devastating to public confidence in the monarchy. Richards nodded grimly. Which is why our investigation needs to uncover not just what Victoria has done, but who she's working for and what their ultimate objectives are. If we can expose a broader conspiracy against the crown, it might help frame Victoria as an outside threat rather than a failure of royal judgment. As Colonel Richards prepared to leave, Alexander felt both hope and trepidation about the path ahead. They finally had the resources and expertise needed to uncover the truth about Victoria's activities, but they were also about to embark on an investigation that could ultimately destroy everything his father held dear. Your Royal Highness, Richard said as he reached the door, I want you to know that your mother would be proud of what you're doing. She spent her final months trying to protect this family and this kingdom from a threat she couldn't fully understand. Her son is going to finish the work she started. Alone in the library after Richard's departure, Alexander stood before his mother's portrait, which had been moved to Thornfield Manor years earlier. Queen Catherine's gentle eyes seemed to look directly at him, and for a moment he could almost hear her voice offering the guidance and support he desperately needed. I promise you, he whispered to the painted image, that Victoria will not succeed in destroying what you died trying to protect. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, I will not let your sacrifice be in vain. Outside, the fog was beginning to clear, revealing glimpses of the vast estates that had been in his family for centuries. The sight reminded Alexander of everything that was at stake, not just his personal family relationships, but the future of an institution that had provided stability and continuity to millions of people for generations. The battle lines were now clearly drawn. On one side stood Victoria Ashworth and her unknown allies, armed with 15 years of patient planning and intimate knowledge of the royal family's vulnerabilities. On the other side stood Alexander, Isabella, and Colonel Richards, armed with determination and the evidence that Queen Catherine had died trying to preserve. The next few weeks would determine whether the kingdom would survive the greatest internal threat it had ever faced, or whether Victoria's long game would finally achieve its devastating conclusion. But, as Alexander looked once more at his mother's portrait, he felt a certainty that transcended fear or doubt. The crown's hidden truth was about to be revealed, and, when it was, justice would finally be served for a queen who had died trying to save her kingdom from its most dangerous enemy. The secure communication device buzzed precisely at midnight, cutting through the silence of Alexander's study at Thornfield Manor. Colonel Richard's voice carried an urgency that immediately put Alexander on high alert. "Your Royal Highness, we have the results of our investigation. I need to see you immediately, but not at the manor. Meet me at the old hunting lodge on the northern border of your estate in 1 hour. Come alone, and make sure you're not followed." The hunting lodge had been abandoned for decades, a stone structure hidden deep in the woods where Alexander's grandfather had once entertained visiting dignitaries away from the formality of court life. As Alexander made his way through the dark forest, guided only by moonlight and his intimate knowledge of the estate's paths, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night would mark a point of no return in their desperate struggle against Victoria's schemes. Colonel Richards was already waiting when Alexander arrived, his car hidden among the trees, and his expression grimmer than Alexander had ever seen it. The lodge's interior was dusty and cold, illuminated only by battery-powered lanterns that cast eerie shadows on the walls lined with hunting trophies from a bygone era. "Colonel, your message suggested that you've discovered something significant." "Significant doesn't begin to cover it, Your Royal Highness. What we've uncovered is a conspiracy so vast and sophisticated that it makes our worst-case scenarios look optimistic." Richards opened a leather briefcase and spread dozens of documents across the old oak table that dominated the lodge's main room. "Victoria Ashworth doesn't exist," he began without preamble. "The woman your father married is actually Elena Vasquez, a former intelligence operative for the Republic of Valdoria who was presumed dead after a failed coup attempt 12 years ago." Alexander felt the ground shift beneath him as he processed this revelation. The Republic of Valdoria was a neighboring nation that had been founded 50 years earlier when revolutionaries successfully overthrew their own monarchy. For decades, Valdoria had served as an ideological beacon for Republican movements throughout the region, and their government had never hidden their belief that all monarchies were outdated obstacles to democratic progress. Elena Vasquez specialized in long-term infiltration operations, Richards continued, pointing to what appeared to be an intelligence dossier complete with photographs. Her mission profile indicates expertise in assuming false identities, gaining the trust of high-value targets, and executing plans that required years of patient development. Alexander studied the photographs, which clearly showed a younger Victoria, or rather, Elena, in what appeared to be military training exercises and formal intelligence briefings. The woman in these images possessed the same basic features as the Victoria he knew, but there was something harder in her expression, a calculating coldness that had been completely absent from the loving stepmother who had raised him. How did she manage to create such a convincing false identity? "That's where the conspiracy becomes truly frightening," Richards replied, spreading out additional documents. "Elena Vasquez didn't create Victoria Ashworth's identity, she assumed it. The real Victoria Ashworth was a British diplomat's daughter who died in a car accident in Switzerland 18 years ago. Her death was reported as accidental, but our investigation suggests it was carefully orchestrated to provide Elena with a ready-made identity complete with educational records, social connections, and a background that would make her attractive to your father." The implications were staggering. Alexander realized that he wasn't dealing with a simple case of an ambitious woman lying about her past to secure an advantageous marriage. This was a state-sponsored intelligence operation that had been in development for nearly 2 decades, designed specifically to infiltrate and destabilize the Eldorian monarchy. "Colonel, if this operation has been running for 18 years, that means it began during my mother's lifetime. They were planning to eliminate her from the very beginning. The evidence strongly suggests that your mother's death was indeed murder, carried out to clear the way for Elena's insertion into your family. The rare allergic reaction that supposedly killed her? Our investigation found that the medication she received that day had been contaminated with a synthetic compound that mimics natural allergic responses while leaving no trace in standard toxicology tests. Alexander's hands clenched into fists as the full horror of what had happened to his family became clear. His beloved mother had been murdered by foreign agents. His grieving father had been systematically manipulated and deceived, and he and Isabella had been raised by the very person responsible for destroying their family. "There's more," Richards continued, his voice heavy with the weight of additional revelations. "Elena's mission wasn't just to destabilize your family. It was to gather intelligence that would allow Valdoria and its allies to orchestrate the complete overthrow of monarchies throughout the region. The financial records we've uncovered show payments not just from Valdorian intelligence services, but from Republican movements in 6 different countries." Richards spread out a complex organizational chart that showed the scope of the conspiracy. Lines connected Elena to various political operatives, intelligence agents, and revolutionary groups across the continent. At the center of it all was a coordinated effort to eliminate monarchical government throughout the region and replace it with republican systems modeled after Valdoria. The Commonwealth Education Summit that Princess Isabella is attending in Edinburgh, it's the perfect opportunity for the next phase of their plan. 3 other regional monarchs will be represented there by senior royal family members. If something were to happen to multiple royal heirs simultaneously, Alexander felt sick as he understood the implication. A coordinated attack on royal family members from different kingdoms would create a regional crisis that could destabilize multiple governments simultaneously, potentially triggering the kind of chaos that revolutionary movements needed to seize power. Isabella is in immediate danger. I've already contacted our security assets in Edinburgh. Princess Isabella is being discreetly relocated to a safe house as we speak, though she doesn't know the real reason for the enhanced security measures. As far as she's aware, there was a general terrorist threat against the summit. Alexander felt a mixture of relief and mounting urgency. What about my father? If Elena realizes that we've uncovered her true identity, that's our most immediate problem. According to our intelligence sources, Elena received new orders from her handlers 3 days ago. The timeline for their operation has been accelerated dramatically. Richards pulled out a final set of documents, communication intercepts, and surveillance reports that painted a terrifying picture of Elena's current activities. She's been meeting regularly with individuals we've now identified as Valdorian intelligence operatives. These meetings have intensified over the past week, and yesterday she received what appears to be a package of sophisticated surveillance equipment. More troubling, she's been asking detailed questions about your father's daily routine, his security protocols, and his medical information. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. She's planning to eliminate father as well. The State of the Kingdom address provides the perfect opportunity. Your father will be appearing before Parliament, with full media coverage and an audience that includes foreign dignitaries and political leaders. If Elena has positioned herself to influence the content of his speech, she could use the occasion to make announcements that would devastate the monarchy's credibility. Alternatively, if something were to happen to your father during or immediately after the address, Alexander didn't need Richards to finish the thought. The death of King Edmund during such a public, symbolic occasion would create exactly the kind of crisis that Elena's backers needed to justify intervention in Eldorian affairs. We have to stop her. Yes, but we have to be extremely careful about how we proceed. Elena has spent 15 years establishing herself as the perfect royal wife. Any direct accusation against her will be met with complete disbelief from your father and skepticism from the public. We need to catch her in the act of her treachery, with evidence so overwhelming that it cannot be dismissed or explained away. Alexander's mind raced through their options. What do you recommend? A carefully orchestrated trap. We allow Elena to believe that her plans are proceeding smoothly while secretly documenting her activities and communications. When she moves to implement the final phase of her operation, we'll be ready with evidence and resources to stop her. How long do we have? Richards consulted his notes. The State of the Kingdom address is scheduled for next Friday, 6 days from now. Based on the intercepted communications, Elena appears to be planning something significant for that occasion. If we're going to act, it has to be before then. Alexander felt the weight of the crown he would someday wear settling more heavily than ever on his shoulders. The next 6 days would determine not just the fate of his family, but the future of the monarchy itself. The woman who had raised him, comforted him through adolescence, and guided him toward adulthood, was actually a foreign agent who had murdered his mother and was now planning to destroy everything his family had built over centuries. Colonel, I need you to coordinate with your contacts to ensure Isabella's safety and to monitor Elena's activities around the clock. I'll return to the palace tomorrow and begin the most difficult performance of my life. What do you mean? I'm going to pretend that everything is normal. I'm going to interact with Elena as if she's still the loving stepmother I've always believed her to be, while secretly gathering evidence of her treachery. And I'm going to protect my father without letting him know that the woman he loves is planning to destroy everything he holds dear. Richard studied Alexander's face in the flickering light of the lanterns. Your Royal Highness, are you prepared for what this might cost you personally? Exposing Elena will devastate your father. It will also expose the fact that your family has been living a lie for 15 years. Alexander had been grappling with this reality since their investigation began. The revelation of Elena's true identity would shatter his father's world and raise difficult questions about the monarchy's judgment and security. But the alternative, allowing Elena to succeed in her mission, was unthinkable. My mother died trying to protect this kingdom from exactly this threat. I won't dishonor her sacrifice by failing to finish what she started, regardless of the personal cost. As they prepared to leave the hunting lodge, Richards handed Alexander a small device disguised as a fountain pen. This is a sophisticated recording device that will capture both audio and video. Keep it with you whenever you're around Elena. Everything she says and does from now on could be crucial evidence. Alexander pocketed the device, feeling its weight as a tangible reminder of the deadly game he was about to enter. For 15 years, Elena Vasquez had been playing the role of Victoria Ashworth with Oscar-worthy skill. Now it was his turn to give the performance of a lifetime. The return journey to Thornfield Manor passed in contemplative silence as Alexander mentally prepared for what lay ahead. Tomorrow, he would return to the palace and resume his relationship with the woman who had murdered his mother. He would smile at her jokes, accept her affection, and behave as the loving stepson she expected him to be, all while knowing that she was planning to destroy everything he held dear. As the manor came into view, Alexander felt a strange sense of closure. His mother's spirit seemed to hover over the ancient stones, and he could almost hear her voice offering the strength and guidance he needed for the battle ahead. The final phase of Elena Vasquez's 18-year mission was about to begin. But this time, she would not be playing against a grieving widower or trusting children. This time, she would be playing against a future king who finally understood the true nature of the enemy his family faced. And Alexander was determined that when this deadly game reached its conclusion, justice would finally be served for Queen Catherine, protection would be secured for King Edmund, and the crown that had been under siege for 15 years would emerge stronger than ever. The woman who called herself Victoria Ashworth had played her part perfectly for nearly 2 decades. But Prince Alexander of Eldoria was about to prove that he could play his role even better. The future of the kingdom depended on it. The morning of the State of the Kingdom address dawned gray and cold, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon like an omen of the confrontation to come. Alexander stood in his suite at the royal palace, adjusting his ceremonial uniform while his mind raced through the final details of the plan that would either save the kingdom or destroy his family forever. Over the past 6 days, he had given the performance of his lifetime. Each morning, he had greeted Elena with genuine seeming affection, shared family meals filled with seemingly natural conversation, and maintained the facade of a loving stepson preparing to support his father's important address to the nation. Not once had his carefully constructed mask slipped, despite the growing mountain of evidence that Colonel Richards continued to provide about Elena's true activities. The recording device, disguised as a fountain pen, had captured dozens of conversations that revealed the depth of Elena's deception. Private phone calls in foreign languages to unknown contacts, discussions about timeline acceleration and asset positioning, and most damning of all, a conversation where she had referred to King Edmund as the target rather than her husband. Through it all, Alexander had maintained his role while secretly coordinating with Richards to document every aspect of Elena's conspiracy. They now possessed evidence that would satisfy even the most skeptical observer: financial records, communication intercepts, video surveillance, and testimony from intelligence operatives who had finally been convinced to cooperate with the investigation. Today, all of that preparation would be put to the ultimate test. A soft knock at his door interrupted Alexander's final preparations. "Come in," he called, expecting to see his valet with last-minute adjustments to his uniform. Instead, Elena entered the room, resplendent in a deep blue gown that perfectly complemented the royal family's ceremonial colors. For a moment, seeing her elegant figure and warm smile, Alexander felt a jarring disconnect between the loving stepmother who had raised him and the foreign agent who had murdered his mother. The cognitive dissonance was so profound that he had to consciously remind himself that the woman before him was Elena Vasquez, not Victoria Ashworth. "Alexander, darling," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of maternal affection that had comforted him through countless difficult moments over the years. "You look absolutely magnificent. Your father will be so proud to have you standing beside him today." "Thank you, Victoria," he replied, the false name feeling like acid on his tongue. "I know how important this address is to both of you. All your hard work helping father prepare his speech will finally be revealed to the kingdom." Elena's eyes sparkled with what appeared to be genuine pride, but Alexander now recognized it as the satisfaction of an operative whose long mission was approaching its successful conclusion. "Your father's speech will indeed change everything," she said, moving to adjust an imaginary flaw in his uniform's decoration. "The kingdom will see a new vision for their future, one that will transform Eldoria's relationship with the world." The casual way she spoke about transforming the kingdom sent a chill down Alexander's spine. He forced himself to smile warmly while the recording device in his pocket captured every word. "I'm sure the people will be very interested to hear Father's new perspectives on governance," he said carefully. Elena's hand lingered on his shoulder as she studied his face with an intensity that made him wonder if she suspected something. "Alexander, you've grown into such a thoughtful young man. Your mother would be so proud of the king you're going to become." The reference to his murdered mother nearly broke Alexander's composure. For a moment, he felt an almost overwhelming urge to confront Elena with the truth, to demand answers about Queen Catherine's death, and to end the charade that had poisoned his family for 15 years. But he forced himself to maintain control, knowing that premature action could destroy their carefully laid plans. "I hope I can honor both her memory and father's example," he managed to say. "Oh, my dear boy, you will honor them both in ways you cannot yet imagine," Elena replied with a smile that now seemed predatory rather than maternal. As Elena left to attend to her own preparations for the ceremony, Alexander felt the full weight of what was about to unfold. The State of the Kingdom address would begin in 3 hours, and, according to the intelligence Richards had gathered, Elena planned to use the occasion to implement the final phase of her 18-year mission. The plan, as they had pieced it together from intercepted communications and surveillance, was breathtakingly audacious. King Edmund's speech had been carefully crafted to include announcements that would seem like progressive reforms, but would actually undermine the constitutional foundations of the monarchy. Changes to succession laws, the establishment of new oversight committees with Republican sympathies, and the creation of democratic councils that would gradually assume royal prerogatives. But that was only the beginning. Following the address, Elena had arranged for the revelation of carefully fabricated evidence suggesting that the royal family had been embezzling from national charities and maintaining secret offshore accounts. The scandal would be timed to break just as international media attention was focused on the kingdom, creating a crisis that would justify intervention by Valdorian peacekeeping forces and ultimately result in the abolition of the monarchy. The genius of the plan lay in its use of King Edmund's own voice and authority to begin the destruction of the institution he had spent his life serving. By the time he realized what was happening, it would be too late to undo the damage. Alexander made his way to his father's private study, where King Edmund was making final preparations for the most important speech of his reign. At 62, the king still projected the dignity and gravitas that had made him beloved by his people, but Alexander could see the stress of recent weeks in the lines around his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands as he reviewed his notes. "Father," Alexander said, entering the study with the reverent atmosphere of a cathedral, "how are you feeling about today's address?" King Edmund looked up with a smile that held both anticipation and concern. "Nervous, if I'm honest. Victoria has convinced me to take some bold new approaches in today's speech. She believes the kingdom is ready for significant changes in how we approach governance." Alexander felt his heart break a little at the trust in his father's voice. King Edmund genuinely believed that his wife was helping him modernize the monarchy for the benefit of his people. He had no idea that every suggestion she had made was designed to weaken the institution he loved. "What kind of changes are you planning to announce?" "Constitutional reforms that will increase democratic participation in royal decisions, new oversight mechanisms to ensure transparency in royal finances, and the establishment of citizens' councils to advise on policy matters, King Edmund replied, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone who believed he was making history for the right reasons. Each item on that list would, in reality, create legal mechanisms for dismantling royal authority and replacing it with republican institutions. Elena had spent months convincing King Edmund that these changes would strengthen the monarchy by making it more responsive to modern democratic values, when in fact they would provide the legal framework for its abolition. Father, before you deliver your address, there's something I need to discuss with you. Something about Victoria that, King Edmund raised his hand, cutting off Alexander's words. Son, I know you and Isabella have always had reservations about Victoria. I understand that accepting a new mother figure was difficult after losing Catherine. But Victoria has been nothing but devoted to our family and our kingdom for 15 years. Whatever concerns you might have, today is not the time to air them. Alexander realized that approaching his father directly was not going to work. The psychological manipulation Elena had employed was too deep, too carefully constructed to be overcome with simple warnings or even evidence. King Edmund's love for his wife and his desire to believe in her goodness would make him resistant to accepting the truth until it was presented in a way that left no room for denial. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor warned Alexander that their private conversation was about to be interrupted. Elena entered the study with her usual grace, carrying herself like a woman who was about to witness the culmination of nearly 2 decades of planning. My darlings, she said, embracing both Alexander and his father with apparent warmth. Are you ready to make history today? As ready as I'll ever be, King Edmund replied, accepting a kiss on the cheek from his wife. Though I must admit, I'm still somewhat nervous about some of the more dramatic changes we're announcing. Elena's smile was radiant as she gazed at her husband with what appeared to be adoring support. Edmund, you're going to transform this kingdom's relationship with democracy itself. Future generations will look back on today as the moment when Eldoria truly joined the modern world. Alexander watched this exchange with growing determination. The time for subtlety and careful investigation had passed. Elena was moving to implement her final gambit, and only direct action,